So it's an honor to end out this amazing conference. I just want to start out by saying that I think it is safe to say that the phage therapy, the century-old technique of treating bacterial infections with phages, has been making a comeback over the last decade. And the recent success of a few compassionate cases has given us hope for treating antimicrobial resistance in the future, but also has garnered a lot of attention among the common public, thanks to some news articles with very exaggerated and clickbaity titles. But before phage therapy actually moves from bench to bedside and can be implemented extensively, beyond compassionate use cases, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. While I'll skip reading these out because most of these questions have already been discussed throughout the conference, I will say that we at the FDA are very interested in that last question of what should be the approach if the host becomes resistant to phage. And in our lab, we are using the host phage duo system of Staphylococcus aureus and phage K to examine potential paths of resistance and underlying mechanisms. I'll skip an introduction on the host, but I want to quickly remind a few points about the phage involved here. So phage K is a double-stranded DNA myophage that has been studied since 1950s. We already know that it uses valdecoic acid as a surface receptor. And it has a 139 kb genome with a terminal redundancy of 8.5 kb, which means that it gets packaged as a 148 kb genome within the capsid. The genome is currently annotated to encode 212 genes or coding sequences and 4 tRNA genes. 177 of these coding sequences do not have any predicted function so far, so there is still a lot of unknown about the phage. It is known to be virulent and has wide host range, so it is a potential candidate for therapeutic use. And also, K-like viruses have been isolated from cocktails that are currently being used by the Eliava Institute, and these phages have been shown to be effective in vitro. And also, a cocktail of K-like phages, there are reports that they have shown reduced lung staph populations in mouse models. So our idea is that by understanding post-phage interactions between staph and phage K, we can potentially extend this knowledge or extrapolate this knowledge to other therapeutic candidates too. So we began in our lab by isolating 18 genetically independent host mutants, and these were isolated by Dr. Melissa Ray, a previous lab member, and she isolated them in a background in the background of NRS 384, which is a USA 300 MRSA clinical isolate. Shown here is a representative picture showing the plaquing defect of phage K on these mutants. So when we sequenced these 18 mutants, interestingly, we found that 6 of these 18 mutants had a single missense mutation and just a single missense mutation in the RPOC gene. There was also an additional 7th mutation that had a mutation in the RPOC gene in addition to other mutations. Interestingly, among all these 7, all the mutations happened at only 3 residues, glycine 26, glycine 79, and alanine 276. I would also like to point out that the glycine 26 position seems to be very important because substitutions with even a non-polar amino acid or a positively charged or a negatively charged amino acid, all the 3 of them made the host defective for phage growth. When we try to map these onto structures of the E. coli RNA polymerase, where the structure has been already solved for the beta prime subunit, the corresponding residues seem to be making important contacts with DNA regulatory elements or sigma factors. So we came up with a hypothesis that these mutations in the RNA polymerase beta prime subunit gene potentially affect transcription of phage genes. So to test this idea out, I used an RNA-seq-based approach to study the progress of phage K infection in NRS 384. And what I did was basically grew up cultures of NRS 384 wild type or the RPOC mutant to an OD of about 0.3. I grew this, I did all these experiments at 30 degrees centigrade, added phage K to an MOI of 5, followed the growth or lysis of the cultures, and collected 1 mil samples at 7 different time points throughout the course of infection, where I hope to capture the phage infection life cycle at different stages, starting from adsorption all the way to lysis. Total RNA was extracted from these samples and sent for RNA sequencing. And then I did the post-sequencing bioinformatic analysis in-house using our FDA Galaxy instance. And also all these experiments were done using 4x replicates. So I'll present all these data that we got from the RNA sequence analysis using just some simple questions and answers that we got to them. So the first question that we asked was, how many reads map to the phage genome? So when we look at the distribution of phage RNA reads mapping to the phage and the host genome, we notice that the fraction of reads mapping to the phage genome constantly increased over time, whereas the reads mapping to the host genome decreased constantly over time. This indicates that there is a progressive takeover of the host transcriptionary machinery by the phage that is happening here. And this is also in support of a previous report that had been published in 1980, which showed that there is a degradation of the host genome and that the degraded nucleotides eventually get incorporated into phage DNA. So the next question that we asked was, where do the reads map onto the phage-K genome? So shown here is a bird's view picture of the reads mapping to the phage-K genome from samples taken at different time points. So the phage-K genome I have shown here, broken it into 3 different segments. The repeat regions are highlighted in dark orange. All the annotated genes are shown in yellow. And each of these rows or panels, subpanels, are the reads mapping to the phage, that area of the phage genome from each of the individual time points. So straight away, I could see that there were a few genes that were getting expressed early-ish, but then their expression stops over time. But then there are also genes that did get started on expression early, but then they also continued until later stages. There were genes that started at around 20 minutes, at around 30 minutes. But the thing that caught my attention the most was the reads mapping to these 2 regions where there were no annotated coding sequences. So upon further analysis, we found out that this transcription was happening from 2 long non-coding regions that we designated as LNCRNA1 and LNCRNA2. The first one occurs at around 13.7 kb and the second one occurs at around 38 kb. Both of these are about 500 base pair stretches. What we noticed is that the expression increases continuously over time, and also the expression levels from this loci is higher than any of the other phage loci. These sequences or these regions are highly conserved among K viruses. Shown here is a quick multiple sequence alignment of the regions from different K viruses. They are, as you can see, they're almost 100% identical throughout a lot of different phages. Interestingly, a similar observation was also made by another group in a different phage called VB-SAUM515A1. They also noticed transcription occurring from 2 long non-coding regions. And just to highlight a few other interesting things about these regions is that they always occur adjacent to phage tRNA genes. There are no obvious promoters that explain the high levels of transcription from just these regions. And we are not even sure whether this transcription actually is physiologically relevant to the phage-K life cycle or not. So that still needs to be tested. Well, I did forget to mention that what I showed you was the reads mapping from just 1 replicate. So from now on, whenever the data that I'll be showing is actually a product of combining the feature counts from all the different replicates where the libraries were size normalized and accounted for all kinds of bias. So what I see is that, so shown here basically are feature counts for all the different phage-K genes as they occur in the phage genome. So at 0 minutes, we barely have some background signal. At 2 minutes, we start seeing some levels of expression. That keeps going up at 5 minutes. So at around 5 minutes, mainly the genes that are being expressed are involved, or what we would suggest would be involved in DNA replication, processing, and metabolism. We do see some expression for the tail protein and the major capsid protein as well. And as the infection progresses, we see more and more of the structural proteins starting to get expressed, like the tail measure protein, the tail protein. And then finally, by 40 minutes, most of the peaks that we observe are all from structural proteins or other late proteins such as lysis proteins. Now, just to give you an idea of the relative scales of expression or levels of expression, if we adjust the scale to accommodate the highest peaks at the 40-minute, this is how the progression of the gene expression looks like. So the levels of genes that are being expressed at 5 minutes, 10 minutes are comparatively low, and everything starts kicking up at between 20 to 40 minutes, where it is mostly focused on structural genes. Um, yeah. So we wanted to see if the next question that we asked was, are there any patterns in expression of these phage-K genes? So when I plotted all the feature counts for all the coding sequences over time, this is what kind of mess it gave. But I had a lot of time thanks to the pandemic. So if you stare at them for long enough, you start seeing patterns. So I could start grouping them into different sets based on the time that they were being expressed, the level that were being expressed, and all. So using this information, if we color code the entire genes of phage-K based on the group that they belong to, at what level they are being expressed through the progression of infection, this is what it looks like. So this gives a very detailed look, and also hints that phage transcription might be much more dynamic than what we think. The original school of thought is more of a linear progression of transcription from early, middle, and late, whereas this shows that it might be a little bit more complex than that. Using this information of expression and also predicted location of predicted terminators and promoters, we are able to designate a total of 47 transcriptional units. So breaking down the entire phage genome into 47 transcriptional units. So now the interesting question would also be that, like, what changes occur in host global transcriptome, and when do these changes occur? So what we noticed is that during the early stages of infection, so until 10 minutes, there is a decrease, but the decrease in feature counts across the host genome is slow and steady. But around somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, there seems to be a drastic shutdown of host gene expression. So probably this is the time where the host takeover by phage happens. Now, the next question is, we were really interested in knowing what was going on in the RPOC mutant. So if we compare the transcriptional landscape, or for now, just the RNA composition, comparing the fraction of reads that map to the phage versus the host, we saw that in the mutant, the phage infecting the mutant, the reads kind of plateaued out after 20 minutes, even though it didn't seem like such a significant difference initially. Once we started looking at actually where the reads were mapping and how the expression was different, and you can see as the infection progresses, so until 5 or about 10 minutes, the mutant and the host are performing more or less similarly. And at 20 minutes, the wild type host does a switch to lead gene or structural component expression, which is lacking in the RPOC mutant. This can be visualized in another way also, just by looking at the feature counts over time for the sets of genes that we group together. So the early expressed genes did not show any major change in expression or levels, as I had shown before, but the genes that get expressed at later stages show very drastic or significant differences in expression. Now, obviously, I wouldn't be a phage biologist if I didn't try to isolate suppressors. So I tried, so the question that we asked, can phage-K overcome the growth defect in RPOC host? And so we isolated these mutants that I call as pork mutants, standing for plaques on host resistant to K. And here is again like a representative picture of 2 of the pork mutants that I isolated that played on 2 different hosts. Interestingly, for the mutation for the phage mutants that we isolated against the RPOC host mutants, we noticed, so I observed when we isolated mutants and sequenced them, these phages also had single missense mutations in them. And it was interesting that each of the different position actually was being suppressed by mutations in different genes. So GP118, H91P, this was actually isolated 4 times, again, while looking for suppressors against G26D. GP215 with a mutation at A45 and also a mutation in its ribosome binding site was isolated against G79E, and GP117 with 2 different missense mutations, 2 different missense mutants of GP117 were isolated against RPOC A276A. So this indicates that there could be more than one phage factor involved in that transcriptional takeover that potentially also probably interacts with the RNA polymerase beta prime subunit. So just to conclude, I hope that the main take-home messages from this are that, so we, from our RNA sequencing data, we can say that there seems to be a progressive takeover of the NRF384 host transcription machinery by phage-K. And with all of our data, we get a really detailed look at the transcriptional profile of phage-K. We have been able to identify 47 transcriptional units. We are still trying to fine-tune the quantifying the expression or even qualitatively describing them as early, middle, and late genes. We identified these 2 novel or not so novel long non-coding RNA regions transcribed at very high levels. And also comparing the data from the RPOC mutant, it seems that it lacks that, or it affects its switch to the late gene or structural component expression. And the suppressor mutations that we have isolated seem to suggest that there could be multiple different phage factors involved in this transcription takeover. Overall, all these findings have important implications for treating Staphylococcus infections with K-like viruses. And also, I will just try to end off with the future, the other current things that we are doing and other future stuff that we'll be planning. So we are interested in figuring out the role of these long non-coding RNAs in the actual phage infection cycle. And also, just looking at the plaquing phenotypes of the suppressors, it does look like there seems to be difference between the RPOC mutants at each different positions. So we are trying to quantify and characterize the differences. Then also the quantification of differential phage gene expression between the wild type and the RPOC mutant is something that we are doing. And then we would all obviously be very interested in understanding the mechanism behind suppression of the RPOC growth defect by the phage mutants that we isolated. With that, I would like to thank my boss, Dr. Scott Stibbits, and our phage project group, present and previous lab members of the Stibbits lab. The RNA sequencing was done at Institute of Genomic Sciences, University of Maryland, Baltimore campus, and all of the post-sequencing analysis was done using the High Performance Computing Center Galaxy instance at the FDA. And I would also like to thank the Carlson Lab and Painter Lab, who have been really helpful with the RNA sequencing analysis. And finally, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me a chance to present this research. And thank you all for listening as well. So I'll be happy to take questions.